10,000 hours and how we learn things. So I haven't done a video for a while where I just talk about some stuff that I've been learning or doing or reading about or whatever, so I thought I would do a video on that today. So there are two books that I want to give you a brief overview of and that I also recommend you buy. So one of them is this one, Bounce by Matthew Syed, and this is about the myth of talent and the power of practice. Hopefully you can see that okay. The other one is this one, which hopefully you can see it's on my Kindle. Make It Stick, which is by Peter Brown, Henry Roediger and Mark McDaniel. So this one is about how we learn things and how we learn them so that they stay in our brains. First we'll talk about Bounce and the 10,000 hour rule. So you may or may not have heard about the 10,000 hour rule, where if you want to get to an international elite level of a certain discipline, whether that's music or dancing or boxing or whatever, you need to have practiced something for around 10,000 hours. Now this 10,000 hours, the type of practice you do is very specific. So if you just pick up your guitar and just jam along and you do that every day for 5 hours, for 10,000 hours, you won't become a master. Okay, so the purpose of the 10,000 hour rule is that it has to be deliberate, purposeful practice. So what do we mean by that? So if you're practicing and if you're just bumming around and just playing whatever, you won't get to that level. So it needs to be purposeful, deliberate practice. So practicing very specific things, analysing your mistakes and eliminating them, working on being consistent with what you're doing. A good way of doing that is recording yourself and listening back, or videoing yourself and watching back and correcting your errors or your mistakes. And it's about really focusing on the detail and the precision of what you're doing. And something that made this book come back into my head the other day, I was actually trying to learn the Simpsons theme tune on the guitar. That bit. But after that, there's some really complex orchestra playing and some violin playing. And I listened to that and I thought, that is a really high level of musicianship. How do they get to that level where it is consistent? They could just go and play that 7 nights a week and not make a mistake. And it comes down to this 10,000 hours principle. So in order to get to that level, so you need the 10,000 hours, it needs to be purposeful practice, and you also need a system or a coach to get you to that level. You can coach yourself, but you have to be very disciplined in self-critique, self-observation and correcting yourself. So that's the first part of the video. It's just about the 10,000 hours. I do recommend this book if you haven't read it or you haven't seen it. See if you can get hold of a copy. It's absolutely brilliant. So that was the first part of the video, looking at the 10,000 hours and what that 10,000 hours needs to consist of. So next, let's have a little look at some of the ideas from this book, Make It Stick. So some of the key principles in the book are on how we learn and how we memorise things and how we improve them over time. So one of the key elements is periodic practice. So by that what we mean is, if you just practice the same thing every day, you'll get quite good at that. But you won't really develop over long term, because as soon as you stop doing that, that skill starts to go. And in the book it talks about how you should learn something so that you can do it competently, then put it to the side for a while and come back to it. And when you come back to it, you'll be a little bit rusty. So you'll still have the skill, but you'll be a bit rusty. So then you'll practice it more, but you'll need less time to practice that to get it up to the level that you were at before. Then you do the same thing and you leave it for a little longer period, and then you come back to it again. And the idea is that the ability declines at a lower rate each time you come back to that. So for example, if you practice a complex piece of music and you learn it, now leave it for let's say a week, and come back to it, and you're a little bit rusty, you get there again, you practice until you can do that again. And over time, you have built that muscle memory in a shorter period of time than practicing it every day and every day and every day, because you're spending less time on it, but you're getting it up to the same level each time. One of the next ways of developing a skill is to try and solve a problem without going straight to the solution. So I'll give you an example. Let's say I said I want you to figure out a way of finding the pentatonic scale in all 5 positions in any key without having to spend time thinking about it, so you can just go straight to it. And I did a video a while ago where I teach you how to do this, but I did figure that out myself. There are probably videos on YouTube where you can go and learn that, other than my one, I mean. But I wanted to figure it out myself. To me, it was a puzzle, and I thought, how can I just go straight to a key, or straight to a pentatonic, if I want position 1 or position 2, position 3, position 4, position 5? How can I go straight to it? And I figured it out myself. And I think that the process of figuring that out myself made it a lot stronger in my head than if I'd just gone to a video and found out how to do it. So that's the next principle, is to try and solve a problem before you go straight out and try and find the solutions, to try and solve it yourself. Another example is intermittent testing or intermittent retrieval. So one of the examples I give in the book, which I thought was really good, is to, when you're practicing, write out your practice routine on a flashcard, you know, the little cards you get, and come back to it in a few weeks or a few months. So keep them over time, so you'll end up with loads of little different cards, and then come back to it and pick one out and see if you can instantly do what you were doing at that point. Or give yourself intermittent testing. So if you're learning a specific, say you're doing a music theory or something like that, you learn what you're doing, and then instead of just going back and rereading it, like so often people when they've got an exam, is they'll read some material, and then just before the exam they'll come back and they'll read the whole lot again. Whereas apparently, and this is from this book, which is a really good book on how we learn, a much better way is to read the material and learn it, and then come back but test yourself. So maybe write out some flashcards of the key elements that you wanted to learn and test yourself on it, rather than just rereading the whole thing. So the experiments were that some schools did intermittent testing with their students, and they got a much better result than the students that just did revision classes. So if they were tested throughout and in much shorter bursts as well. So that's another good way of doing it, is to write your practice routines out on flashcards, come back and test yourself with those in the future. Another method of learning was visualization or mental rehearsal. So I find that when I practice more, I also think about the guitar more, and I think about what I'm doing more, and I'll be lying in bed playing things in my head, and apparently that's pretty good, but I didn't know that until I read the book. I just was doing it anyway. But the more you practice visualization and playing things mentally in your head, that will solidify what you're doing in your memory. And last but not least, something called interleaving. So interleaving is where you will practice a couple of things at the same time and interleave them, so that you're not just focusing on one thing. So an example here would be learning some new chord shapes at the same time as learning some new scales, or learning a new song at the same time as learning some new theory, and you do them both at the same time. So you're not just spending 4 hours on scales, 4 hours on chords, or 4 hours on theory, 4 hours on something else. You're doing a little bit of each and mixing it up. And I don't know exactly why that makes your brain remember it, but apparently it does. So yeah, that's another method for learning and keeping things in your memory. I hope you enjoyed that video. If you did, give me a like, subscribe, and I'll see you later.